Hi, I'm Michael Oliver, and this is the high-level overview of a usability benchmarking study that was completed in October 2022 for the secure section of GitLab. So a little background into benchmarking study. Previous scores like SAST didn't really capture the full measure of usability on a system level. They didn't really capture all of the individual things that we needed. But a benchmarking study, which examines cross-workflow use cases and has quantitative and qualitative understanding, is able to get us that usability understanding that we need. So to do this, we had 18 people run through 1 hour of sessions that had 14 tasks in them, and those 14 tasks were broken up over 14 workflows. And people did that in the UX Cloud Sandbox environment with GitLab Ultimate version 15.4.2. So to go over the overall results, the secure benchmark scored relatively well, scored good with an 84.7 out of 100. And to go over the specific workflows, we see that triaging vulnerabilities scored great, with all of the tasks scoring great. Creating a scan result policy scored good, with 2 out of the 3 of the tasks scoring great, with the configuring policy task having some errors. We also saw that configuring SAST analyzer workflow scored good, and this one had the most amount of tasks that had some issues or participants had issues with, and only 1 task scored great. And there was the monitor vulnerabilities in a merge request workflow. This scored great, but there is one caveat that users who did this were not able to see a security widget in the MR overview, which means that they saw what would be GitLab if you did not have the ultimate tier. So in the ultimate tier, there is a security widget that shows up in the MR overview that shows you the scans that were run. But on tiers below the ultimate, that scan is not there. And because of a small overview or oversight during the configuration of this research project, the repository for this project, participants did not see that security scan. So I did not include the results for that task in the overall score, but I will go over the granular results because it is still generalizable for any user that does not have the ultimate plan. But to get started on the actual themes and the results from this study, we were able to associate the results with several themes that actually already existed in our roadmap. Themes such as improving the onboarding experience in SaaS tools. The business objective for this was to increase adoption by lowering the barrier to entry. And one of the things that we found for the results of this study is that participants had a hard time truly understanding what was on the page. And we also saw with our own discussion that some of the page didn't fully reflect the product on the back end and what was being done. So we were able to surface some insights, and we were able to steer the direction for that theme, as well as this theme of improving the learnability for the SaaS configuration tool. Specifically, the desired outcome for this is to increase the confidence in tools, and we saw that participants, even when they did have the correct configuration, they were not confident that it was the correct configuration. So participants really were not able to be confident in any of their choices, which hopefully we're able to use the results to really help this theme when we get to it on the UX roadmap and use all of the insights in order to either do more research or to make the changes necessary. The other theme that we were able to relate to this benchmarking study was the theme of increasing security teams' efficiency when triaging vulnerabilities at scale. The at scale is particularly important. This is something that we know large organizations have trouble with, which is why we try to emulate that in our repository. But we even had one participant specifically say that if the repository were bigger and if there were more vulnerabilities, this task would be even harder to complete. So we were able to get some insight into what organizations want to do and how they frame it in order to triage vulnerabilities at scale. But in order to really get those insights, we actually are going to launch exploration needed, where we already created an actual insight exploration needed issue, which will be research into how moving from severity-based to risk-based security, which will really help us with triaging vulnerabilities at scale. So just to give some specific bits about each workflow, we'll see that the triaging vulnerabilities workflow, what participants had to do was they had to go to the vulnerability report, filter those filter those vulnerabilities, identify a target one and click it, and then create an issue for that. And people were able to do that really successfully. There was a 98% completion for this, and a lot of participants were able to do it with very little errors. What errors there were really just on the filtering the results or on the next one. The filtering results, the errors seen were on the status or on the activity filters. People were either kind of confused about the language on the status or might have been confused on the logic on the activity filter. But when people made a mistake, it was relatively small and they were able to course correct pretty quickly. The other thing that we did see was participants wanted to filter by more than just the date. And that does kind of relate to the research issue I brought up just before of being able to understand more of the risk base, because right now we only sort by date and I think severity. But in order to really understand how organizations think about vulnerabilities, we have to change the way we're actually organizing and sorting vulnerabilities. So we got some insights for that, even a clip from a particular user that you can check out if you'd like. The next workflow that we did was creating a new scan result policy. And for this, people had to first create a new scan result policy. So they had to go to the policy page and click create new scan result policy. Then they had to actually configure the policy correctly. This is the task that they struggled at the most. And then they had to actually just configure to implement those changes with a merge request. So participants were able to find the policy page with ease, but they did have some trouble actually configuring that page. So we can see here the trouble was mainly on the tool selection. There were 5 people who had trouble with the tool selection. They had to click select all to deselect everything and then click SAST. Some people just had some trouble with that. Other people might have had some trouble with the group and the user search. They had to find a security group specifically for this policy and assign it to that security group. And some people had trouble with the logic of the number threshold. So we have it set up for more than X number. So if you set it up for 1, it would actually allow 1 vulnerability, which is what 2 people actually did. So because of those 2, particularly the last 2 pain points, a number of people unfortunately failed this task because the security policies are very strict, and any error on those would lead to a significant amount of error in the repository later. On that, the other small issue that some people had was when creating the policy with a merge request. Some people had issues with the name and the fact that it doesn't look like a policy name is required, but when you click configure with a merge request, it shows up with a warning saying empty policy name. So that happens a couple times, and we actually already have an actual Insight product change issue for that, which will correct that bug and make it obvious that the policy name is required, and the error message pops up in a way that everybody can see, because that was a slight issue for some people. So the next workflow that we did was configuring SAST analyzers. And for this one, people first had to go to the security configuration page. Then they had to enable spot bugs. They had to review all other SAST analyzers and tell me when the product was as secure as it can be. And then they had to configure any changes with a merge request. Overall, participants were able to do this with a relatively high degree of completion percentage of success, but there was a lot of trouble, particularly understanding the SAST page, which we can see here. So the second task they had to do, which is one of the ones they had trouble with, was enabling SAST. In this one, they had to overview the entire page, see that spot bugs, or enabling see that ESLint was disabled, and then specifically enable it. 5 participants really struggled to reveal even just the list of scanners, just to click on expand just so they can see the scanners. And then participants, even when they saw scanners, a lot of them struggled to read and to truly understand everything. And one of the biggest pain points that we saw is that there was a lot of information there that wasn't presented in a clear and concise way. So they weren't able to find the salient points very easily because it's all just information overload. So people really wanted, the number one pain point was people really wanted in-depth but clear information, and especially about the confidence levels, which was particularly confusing for 5 participants where they didn't really understand the confidence levels at all. And our current UI does not give any real insight into what it is. We also had some confusion about the maximum depth on the page 5 participants did not understand it and didn't understand if it was important or if it wasn't important or why not at all, which is particularly troubling, and all of this confusion led to a very poor completion percentage. But thankfully, because the themes in the future roadmap will make some big changes to this page, so hopefully the usability will increase. The next workflow we had was to monitor vulnerabilities in the merge request. And for this, people had to first find a specific open merge request, to review the vulnerabilities associated with that merge request, and then to approve the merge request as needed. And this task was pretty easy for pretty much everybody. The only real problem was the one task of reviewing the job for the merge request. This one was hard just because, like I said, there was no security widget in the overview page. And without that, our UI is not really designed to associate vulnerabilities easily with merge requests, because people had to go to the pipelines page. Many participants did not even know where to go to start because there was no salient information to go there. And participants, even if they did know to go to the pipeline page, they had trouble with the link and thinking it was too hard to find even on that pipeline, on that tab, or on that page. So even if they did get there, they weren't confident that they were on the right path. So from this, we were able to unfortunately see a 50% completion percentage, but that would change, obviously, if there was a security widget there. So that's all of the high-level insights for everything. I want to look at the uncontrolled study factors. First, there was time zone fatigue, and biggest was actually broadband connectivity. There was some issues with some participants just understanding just because they couldn't hear correctly because their internet wasn't so great. But I don't think that should be too much of an issue. And the biggest thing was some participants would be doing their sessions at like 9 p.m. their time, so they'd be pretty tired, which would obviously affect their ability to do the tasks. I will give this presentation in the Slack message, so you can feel free to go to these resources and view any of the resources I have in that epic too. But I want to give a shout out to Lucas Charles and Andy Volpe, who both helped me with this significantly in setting up this environment, getting the research the research project in a way that will help my stakeholders and in a way that can actually be run on a live test environment. So I want to thank them. Thank you very much for listening to all of this. Goodbye.